Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Solaris Blueraven. And we're going to be just interviewing Solaris and hearing a bit about her own experiences as a super soldier, sort of, well, we'll get into all of that. So at this point, Solaris, do you want to give an introduction for yourself?
Sure. I could go back to 2004, which was my original induction date. So everything was normal for me up until April of 2004, when I was inducted into a covert assault program, which dealt with synthetic telepathy, remote viewing, remote manipulation, and a lot of other programs that were running pattern recognition, numbers, codes, frequencies. And I had a live handler at that time, which was identified, and this was also involving a high-profile band in the rock and roll music industry.
Okay. Are you able to say which band?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It was actually Rush, the band Rush, the Canadian band Rush. Neil Peart was, I sent my book, to backtrack a little bit, original book that I wrote, Transmutation Through Ascension, to Neil Peart back in 2004, and within a week of him receiving this, my home was completely inundated with surveillance. My computer was bugged, my phone was bugged, I was bugged, I was remotely manipulated and assaulted with psychotronic programming, and this was 24/7, so I went through a big ordeal with that. Okay,
so let me just sort of try to understand this. You sent the is that the lead singer?
It's the drummer for Rush.
The drummer.
Yeah, he's the drummer.
Okay, so you sent the drummer for Rush your book.
Correct. Transmutation Through Ascension. Yes.
All right, and after that you were inundated by surveillance.
Correct.
Okay, and prior to that you didn't feel that you were?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, my life was normal. I was happily married. I had a great life. Yeah.
Okay.
And I had correspondence with Neil Peart a long, long time ago, so it wasn't like he didn't know who I was. But what was strange was this whole thing just kind of happened with the surveillance and the psychotronic programming as soon as I sent that book.
Okay, and when he received the book, did he write back?
I had correspondence on an email from supposedly the person that was manipulating his email account, which was actually later on. Michael J. Mosbach is the producer. Well, he's not a producer, but he's the director of surveillance and security for Rush, and he was actually involved as my live handler at the time.
Okay, when you say your life handler, how did that manifest?
Well, they interfaced with me live feed, real time, with synthetic telepathy, and Michael J. Mosbach was the live handler involved with that, along with the band members originally, and then it was diverted to a covert intelligence department. But they were the live ones there. Michael was the one training me, programming me, and pretty much was responsible for what happened to me, along with Neil Peart, who had actually hired him for the job.
Okay, hired him for what job?
For the surveillance, for basically doing the illegal work that they did in my house. I mean, basically manipulating me with remote technology, interfacing me onto their communication system, which dealt with synthetic telepathy, but also training me how to speak in communication with the synthetic telepathy. It was more than just me hearing things. It was live feed with a real handler agent. It was like my body was being taken over by my handler at that time.
Okay, well, how did you get? I guess I don't understand. How did you get involved with the handler person?
The handler was hired by Neil Peart to do the job. Basically, he works for Neil Peart. He's the director of surveillance and security for Rush. He also has an Ashkelon background in surveillance and covert technology. He's contracted with government, military, high-profile personnel. So he has access to the black budget communication system, if you want to call it that.
But I mean, in other words, maybe this gets into your sort of your past more so. But I am curious because I do have a background working in music in the past. Are you saying how did he? In other words, they don't come to your door and say, "Hi, we're going to surveil you." What happened? Was this manifested as a romantic relationship and then morphed into something else, or what was the situation?
It was remote. It was remote manipulation. So basically it's a satellite-driven technology. Everything that they did was an induction. I wasn't taken out of my home, but I was driven out of my home through the psychotronic programming. And of course, Michael J. Mosbach being one of the live handlers, and Neil Peart, Geddy Lee and Alex Lyson were also actually involved in that whole ordeal. So this was basically them live feed in real time with communication system and the access of tapping into my electromagnetic field and tagging me with real-time data, which is what happened.
Okay, but how did you detect this?
Well, I'm very psychic to begin with, and I knew because I'm naturally clairvoyant. So as soon as I started hearing this man-made communication system, I was very aware that it wasn't natural. It was man-made, and I actually told them that. I said, this is man-made, and I started actually joking about it at first, but then it became very abusive. Remote manipulation, sexual manipulation also, that did happen. They surge out your chakras and your sexual centers, and they put you in a euphoric space where they can control and manipulate you and also program you, and that puts you in a space of trauma. At least it did for me. I was not verbally communicating with my husband at the time. We got divorced in 4 months' time, and at that point I was thwarted out of my house, and they told me I should go to a place of my choosing. And I went to Maui, and that's when my real handler, Michael J. Mosbach, did show up. So,
okay.
In person.
And Michael J. Mosbach, you say real handler. What do you mean by
Well,
that?
basically, the man behind the mask in the communication system showed up at my door physically on Maui.
And to do what?
Well, because I was turning them in. I was basically, I wasn't going to put up with the abuse and manipulation, so I started contacting a lot of different areas in government, you name it, everybody across the globe, and also the White House, and tried to get everyone's attention about this. This is an abuse. I was being abused, harassed, stalked, manipulated, psychotronically programmed, and I wanted them to know. So Michael basically came out to Maui and asked, how can we help? And he gave me his card, and it had Ashkelon on it, and it had his name on it. He said, don't contact anybody but me or Neil Peart. You can email us about this information, about this data. And that's what I did. I sent him every single thing I was hearing live feed. Everything that they were programming me to hear and see, I sent to Michael. And this perpetuated. He kept kind of stringing me along for years. And finally, in 2006, I had had enough of it. And I came back to the mainland and went back home to Colorado. And I was living in a house there, and Michael wanted to see me again. So he shows up, and he asked me, how would you like to talk in front of a magistrate about this? And I said, sure. I said, but I need someone in my corner. And I was trusting him because he was like a handler still. But at the same time, I knew that obviously he wasn't on my side because nothing was resolved all these years with the psychotronic programming. So what happened was we did go to court, and he denied everything, the entire MK Ultra. He just made fun of it in the courtroom, and it was dismissed. But it is public record. And I still have anomaly signatures and things in my body. I went through a hell of a lot of trauma over the years. This happened in 2004. It took 10 years of my life away just about. Never, my course correction was by me and my higher self over soul. But they could have really damaged and destroyed me even further.
Okay, so in essence what you're saying is you have this band, you've got a person who handles technology for them.
Correct.
And And you send them, just to go through the scenario, you send them a book. You're to some degree a fan, what they would call a fan.
Well, I mean,
prior to that.
I was just someone who I wrote books. I used to correspond with Neil Peart as a writer, not as a groupie or a fan. I mean,
Right.
I was very innocent, and I didn't have a clue that these guys were jerks. But I would send him my poetry and my writing, and because people used to say I wrote like him. That's how it started. So then he would send me a postcard back. So there was correspondence, but it wasn't anything crazy weird.
And so then eventually you get surveilled back by them.
Correct.
After you send the book.
Yeah.
And so then eventually the guy shows up at your door, who is this person
Michael
who
J.
works for
Mosbach.
him.
Yeah.
And how does he preface, in other words, he wants to work with you, he wants to befriend you?
Well, I think he was playing the game of being my friend. I mean, we would talk for hours on the phone, but he was my handler. And he was, not only was I seeing him in physical form, but I was hearing him in real time in a synthetic telepathy communications program. Also, he had remote access to manipulating my body and a lot of other things that had happened. So it was a very intimate relationship, shall we say, with the handler. And insofar as that goes, when he came out, he acted like he wanted to help, but at the same time he was stringing me along. He had no intention.
Did he ever acknowledge during that time that of what he was doing?
He did say a few times. He said one time, I'm in your head, and another time he said, I told him, I said, well, do you have a hearing like mine? And he said, yes. We call it a hearing, special hearing. And so you have to understand too, with the synthetic telepathy, it can be used for a perfect surveillance system where you have, say Neil Peart needs a buddy system for security and surveillance. He doesn't need a headset, he doesn't need a walkie-talkie, he doesn't need a cell phone. He has an interconnected synthetic telepathy communication system with him and his handler, which would have been Michael. And it goes all across the board to government Secret Service too. So this is a synthetic telepathy protective kind of
well, wait, you're saying Michael, wasn't his name Mosbach?
Yes, it is. Michael J. Mosbach.
Okay, but you're saying he had a handler who was...
Well, I would assume, or not even assume, I suspect that Michael J. Mosbach was also Neil's handler because Michael called himself Neil's ghostwriter. So, kind of like the shadow so far as the communication system live feed.
Okay, and so did you go public with this in any way?
I did, and I got totally harassed. They turned their fans against me. I had all sorts of negative things happen to me because of it, yeah.
Okay. And what was in the end, what happened? I mean, you went to a magistrate.
I basically went to a magistrate and I said exactly what had happened to me back in 2004, what happened with the surveillance and the synthetic telepathy and the communication system, and I exposed everything, and the judge just dismissed it and didn't do anything, basically.
Okay, and when you say synthetic telepathy, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, basically what they're doing, we're naturally telepathic to begin with, but what they do is they map the electromagnetic field and they interface it onto a communication system in an underground area, and then they play it back like a live feed communication system. You have a live feed handler at first, and then it gets delegated onto a mimicked kind of communication system. So you have both. And Michael was there originally, and then there was a little bit of a you get a feedback with the communication system when they want to relay or start to program you with other things.
Okay. Well, this is kind of unusual, the way you've approached this. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, what was your background such that you approached this scenario the way you have? Because I think there are plenty of people that get involved in, let's say, relationships, possibly even with bands, where there's an interaction and then there may be a negative sort of surveillance that results from it, but very few would come across, in other words, sort of with your kind of strength and perception to approach this subject in this way. Did you have prior training that,
Well, I think I am a black belt, and I was teaching martial arts. I'm a black belt instructor, and I had my life together when they tagged me. I mean, I was doing land surveying with my husband at that time. I was a drafter, but I also taught martial arts and women's kickboxing and mixed martial arts. So I'm very fortified in my physical body, mentally strong, but also I was doing DNA activation and healing work too. So I had it really together. Plus I was writing books on spirituality at the time.
Okay.
So I really was fortified before they tagged me. But when they tried to break me down and they kept trying to program me, I kept overriding it. And I would say override mentally and psychically, override, delete. I would really screw with them back because I was not about to allow them to totally take me down.
Okay. But at a certain point, in other words, you kept communication with them, right?
I had no choice. Yeah, because the interface was live feed, and I was plugged into them even while they were on tour. As a matter of fact, a lot of the things that came out of one of their Snakes and Arrows albums was stuff that only he and I would have known about live feed and the communication as they were recording it in the studio. Certain keywords and things that were used with me live feed were actually used in that studio, and no one else would have known that.
Okay, and when you're saying live feed, are you talking about a psychic feed?
I'm talking satellite-driven remote communication system that's interfacing with synthetic telepathy between me and live handlers in communication with who's ever patched into that frequency who can hear and communicate. And that's exactly what it is.
Okay. Now, your book that you sent him, which was, again, the name of it?
It's Transmutation Through Ascension. It's actually about DNA activation and healing. And the reason I sent that was because one of my kickboxing students told me that he had had a tragedy with his family. Apparently, this was the last family. The wife and daughter had died tragically. And so I was feeling bad, and I thought, well, wow, this would be a nice book for him. And I had correspondence with him in the past, so I didn't think anything of it, and that's why I sent it. I had no idea they were going to retaliate like that. So.
Okay, very interesting case. All right. So at this point, when did this more or less get resolved or ended?
It didn't really get resolved because what happened was I testified, and he put a temporary restraining order on me for 4 years, Michael did, and then that kind of just dissolved. But they still kind of lured their fans into committing a potential crime against me. I mean, it was like they were using them as a human shield. They would, say all sorts of negative things about me on their page. Of course, I wouldn't look at it, but I heard it from friends. So things like that, but I just wound up taking the helm and writing the truth. I decoded the covert technology. I really just said, screw the band. I'm going into the covert technology and I'm going to decode it because it's embedded in my body. I need to know what it is. I need to know how it functions. And so that's what I did. I rolled up my sleeves and I researched and investigated, and I got through all the technology. I mean, I really understood it, and I validated through actually Robert Duncan, who's somebody who's written Ghost, one of his books, what's it called now? I can't remember it. But he actually is here at the conference today, and so Project Soulcatcher anyways, but he actually validated a lot of the technology through psychotronics and how they use it. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And so, let's see, what have you been involved in since then?
Well, what's really weird is when I was being inducted, when I moved on Maui, I started getting trained for security and surveillance work. And that was not in my orbit, that was not in my future, that was something that was falling onto my lap, so to speak. So I wound up doing a lot of that, security, surveillance, casino surveillance. I got very good at it. But I think that was Michael's energetic connected in with mine. So that was one of my I don't want to say it's a past life, but it's something that I was trained in.
Okay, and when you say surveillance work, meaning what?
Just regular casino surveillance.
Which is what?
Being in the room, working the cameras and observing people, and working with the police department, law enforcement, writing reports about unusual activity or criminal activity.
Oh, very interesting. So you didn't, your training wasn't in this originally?
No, not at all. But I kept it together. I just kept it together. I kept going, and I trusted the universe. I trusted spirit. As you were saying, we're spiritual beings. And I kept that focus and that benchmark the whole time. They tried to pull me under.
Right. So at that point, you actually got involved in surveillance. Did you learn, I guess, to get back to this sort of relationship you had with this handler person, what, in real time, did you have real-time interactions with him for a period of time where you learned from him?
Well, he was dumping programs in me through the communication system, and I didn't realize that until later on. But the pattern recognition, code recognition, numbers, colors, that's huge for me, and it still is. It's not necessarily a negative trigger, but it is there. And I can locate things quickly upon color, numbers, codes, and it's really amazing. So I know there are certain things that they kind of downloaded into me while I was being inducted, and that's part of it.
Okay. Did you ever have interaction with Neil, the initial person that you sent the book to?
Originally, he was interacting with me live feed, and Michael as well. So yes, he was involved. And then it was delegated more to Michael as my handler, and Neil kind of took off on evading it. And Michael maintained control as a handler. And then they just tried to say, oh, no, it's an imposter, and they were trying to just pretend it wasn't valid. And, of course, I do know other covert technology departments were involved, but not initially. Initially, it was the band, and they do have access to the covert technology. So this is something they can get their hands on.
Okay, but why would a band be interested in that?
Well, for one thing, if you ever look at Neil Peart's lyrics, it's all about signals intelligence and MK Ultra type projects. If you really, really dive into it, you can see it. And it's all decoded in so many different ways, but it's used for surveillance. I mean, this type of the type of anomalies that I have, and the type of things that they did to me, is definitely used for a spy bird, for someone who could easily spy, and that's what I was doing. Even though Michael was my handler, I was the spy. I mean, wherever I went, I was seeing through someone else's eyes, or someone else was seeing through my eyes. So that's part of it as well.
Okay, just in terms of your own sort of abilities. Prior to this happening, what was your trajectory? Like, what had you what did you do for a living prior to that?
Well, I was doing the AutoCAD drafting. I was working with my husband. He was a land surveyor, so I was making maps, so doing topographic maps and things like that. I also wrote books. I was writing books on spirituality. I also had very, very spiritual beings, so I taught DNA activation, and I started running groups where we would do like circles, running circle of energy, basically just running grids and things like that energetically. So we're working on a higher level of consciousness and writing my books, and that's pretty much what I was doing, and teaching martial arts. So I kind of had my life in balance and in order at the time they tagged me. I was very, very fortified. Okay,
but in terms of the kind of, because you seem to have a very interesting mind. And that means like you have special talents in this area having to do with and I'm just trying to figure it out a little bit here, but in terms of graphics abilities, first of all, you're saying even in terms of you seem to have a very accurate recall capability. Yeah. As well as you said, numbers and colors. In other words, being able to pinpoint information.
Right. Yeah.
Follow
remote
trails.
Viewing is definitely part of that. And I'm naturally psychic to begin with, so I think what they did was try to enhance that a lot. But they also tried to control and manipulate it, so it wasn't like I had free will while they were integrating their own program with me. So. Okay.
So at this point in your life, what are you doing?
I'm writing books, I'm having closure with it, but I still have the anomaly signatures that are just, I keep rewriting the program and rewriting it in alignment with spirit instead of control and manipulation. And that's what I'm talking about tomorrow, actually, at the summit, is basically resolutions to the covert technology and what I've been doing to get through it, because a lot of people they commit suicide, they get into forced suicides through the duress of the programming. So.
Okay, very interesting. All right, well, in terms of the overall big picture of what you think is going on here on Earth, and with this sort of window into this particular area, have you put it together to some degree? Have you put together the use of surveillance technology and what their end game is?
I think their end game is to control and manipulate the masses through kind of a transhumanism. That's my take on it. I was interfaced with a machine world that is part of me now, and I have to come to terms with that. I mean, I have anomaly signatures that are embedded in my neural circuitry. I have a lot around my crown. There's one near my chest. These have been measured by Steve Colburn, and they're actually in my documentary. So these are things that have sort of integrated and hardwired into my own body and mind. So right now I'm just transcending with it, but that is part of the transhumanism. It's about control and manipulation. It's about not honoring free will and trying to program people's minds to a point where they just get wiped out, or you think what we want you to think, or and if you don't comply, we'll torture you, and that does happen. So it's no good.
And what about in terms of, for example, are you familiar with the Cray computers underground in Colorado?
Yes, and I live in Colorado. So.
So did you ever feel that you were interacting with those computers?
I do know I have, because a lot of the synthetic communication systems where they take the brain template, I know is buried in an underground area to some extent, and that is a supercomputer or computers that are enhanced with AI intelligence, yeah.
And are you, there's some information out there that I have gotten has to do with an AI running the planet. Have you ever gotten any information in that way?
Well, I get the feeling that you're correct. I haven't really seen it, but I've experienced the motherboard, so to speak, with the interface. I mean,
right.
A lot was my live handler, and a lot was the communication system, which mirrors an AI. I mean, it's very ominous. It's a very ominous presence.
So when you say the communication system, meaning, again, synthetic technology.
Correct. Yeah.
But are you talking also about, for example, I'm aware of a network of nanosatellites that's associated with a main sort of central area called Mother, which is a satellite in and of itself, from what I understand, that's floating above our planet. Has any of this information come through to you?
Well, it's interesting because when you say it, I mean, I know that it was satellite-driven technology. So when I was tagged and when they implanted me, it was satellite-driven technology for sure. And I do believe it's connected to something along the lines of that. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And what about the idea of, when you say implants, usually that would require some kind of physical abduction scenario, whether it be my lab or with ETs. Do you feel that took place?
I think there's a hybridization. I mean, it was real people, but the technology is definitely connected to an extraterrestrial source. That they've kind of mimicked it and recreated their own design. So that's their version, but definitely. And I do know that we're starseeds, so that's another thing too.
Okay. Well, this is a very sort of interesting discussion. Is there anywhere you want to go with what you've told me? Anything that maybe you haven't talked about in the past, or that you want to add to this this small video of you and your work?
I think the main thing is just people being aware of what type of technology we're dealing with and how it integrates into the body. Because I have things that are embedded now that are permanent, and it's not business as usual and life goes on as usual. It changes your life forever, and there's no going back. And people need to understand that. My life will never be the same. I can't reintegrate into a regular society anymore because of the way I have been manipulated, controlled, and programmed. It's not that I can't. It's just that there's so many things that have crossed barriers with this technology that I think that it really has pushed things and thwarted things to a much, much higher level. So people need to be aware of that and be prepared in case anything like this happens to them.
Okay. When you say you've got implants, are you able to show us anything that would be evident physically? Could we see it with a naked eye?
I can't see them with a naked eye, but they can be measured. And Steve Colburn has measured these things, and I have it on my documentary DVD. They also interfere with a lot of different things now and then, computers, electricity, this and that. One that bounces to music on the radio, and that's the one that they did into my chest cavity, and that is. Originally it was Neil Peart playing live drum feed in concert, and that's how they started the initiation, or it's not really initiation, but that's how they initiated it. And then it went into a communication system where it just mimics music. So I've got a lot of things that are in there.
So do you have, for example, music running in your head all the time?
No, only if I turn on the radio and then it starts to go and play the music with it.
It
interacts. It's basically a symbiotic thing. It's intelligent because it interacts with the wind, it interacts with music, sound, frequencies, any type of electricity or energetic. So it's very interactive. And that's not part of me.
Okay, so when you say it interacts, what does it do?
It just moves. It moves to the music, it moves to the wind, there's movement. It's like a pulse.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's detected by your body or your senses?
It's detected by me, and then it's also been measured by Steve Colburn.
Okay, let me see. What about sort of physical enhancement? Do you feel that your physicality has benefited or deteriorated as a result of interaction with this?
I think originally it had benefited, but at the same time I was really into light body and Merkaba. So my own energetic was really at peak. I mean, it was perfect. So when they started their stuff, they mapped everything, and they were taking basically just a whole analysis of my entire being and my entire body. So I think that it did help, and it kept me fortified, but at the same time it was a torturous avenue, which I felt like it was sort of taking away as well. And now I can tell you, this is 10 years later, and I don't feel as strong as I used to, but I think a lot of it is that I'm desensitized to. They've kind of, I can't feel the way I used to as an empath. That's completely shielded now. It's like I have a suit on all the time. So that's how I've noticed that.
All right. Well, thank you for this interview. I appreciate the time to talk with you. It sounds like you have a very interesting intellect, and I think your books would be very interesting to read. So, I think I would certainly take a look at them and encourage others to do so. Maybe you can come on my radio show sometime. We can extend this conversation. Is there any last things you'd like to add to our discussion here?
Last thing is, I just wish people would understand. I mean, I try not to talk about the band, but I do know 100% that they were involved in this covert assault, and I've taken a lot of heat because I've exposed them. So now, like I said, they are guilty of that action. I'm not going backwards on that in any form or design, but what I'm trying to do is move on and keep progressing on a higher level. And I like to get that message across because it's like, it's hard to go backwards all the time and rehash things, but I want people to understand what the benchmark of this whole thing happened. I mean, my life would have been normal had I not sent my book to Neil Peart. None of this would have happened.
Okay, very interesting. So you didn't have any other band interactions, I take it, in your life?
Nope.
Okay. Are you a musical person in any way?
I write music and I play the flute, and I've always been able to write beautiful music when I was younger, and of course when I grew older I started getting more into the psychic aspects of it. Instead I channeled it differently. Yeah, and I write poetry, and people used to say I used to write like Neil Peart, which is one of the reasons I contacted him.
I
They
see.
said, "Oh, you need to contact him." So weird.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, Solaris.
Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
You too.